All right, so who's ready to get hype about HIPAA? All right, who wants to leave early? Okay. Well, let me tell you, I can talk about HIPAA all day, but about an hour ago, I realized that the shoes that I'm wearing are the devil, so I'm not going to be able to stand up in them for a whole 30 minutes. So it looks like we're all going to get to leave a little bit early. But I'm Samaria Munnerlin Dunson. Like she said, I'm the director of the Office of Compliance and Ethics. I have been practicing law for 15 years this year, and for the past almost 10 years, I've served in some role as the privacy officer in some capacity for the Department of Public Health. So I'm going to be talking about some of these things related to HIPAA for part of the presentation, and then I'm also going to be talking about some other things that I've talked about with my colleagues that might be helpful to you all as healthcare providers. So the first thing is just a refresher on what PHI is. Does everybody know what PHI is? Protected health information, individually identifiable health information about somebody's past, present, future medical, mental condition that is kept by a covered entity. So it's obviously going to be you all, and it obviously is going to have a lot to do with that newborn screening form that Will was talking about. All right, so the identifiers for protected health information are listed here and on the next slide, and I've gone through and actually marked in red the things that are actually found on the newborn screening form, and that's going to be important when I talk with you about disposal of protected health information. And then as you can also see here, it has a medical records number, and obviously it's any other information about a patient or a client. And I noticed that like the Medicaid number is on there. And other demographic information. So one thing that I hear people talk about a lot when they talk about HIPAA, people often use it as a crutch to keep people from getting information. I'm sorry I can't give you that record because of HIPAA. I'm sorry I can't share that information with you. But it's important to realize that HIPAA was not meant to interfere with the treatment or payment of health care. So that's why we have these HIPAA exceptions: treatment, payment, healthcare operations. You'll hear them referred to a lot as TPO. And what that basically means is from provider to provider, we can very freely communicate about a person's health care without an authorization. I know at the department when we're billing people, we can very freely talk with Medicaid, Blue Cross Blue Shield, any other insurance provider without a patient's authorization. One of the things that comes up a good bit from our employees at Public Health and when we're talking to other healthcare providers has to do with the minimum necessary rule. So I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly, but what it basically means is that if you're a healthcare provider and you have a direct treatment relationship with the patient, you're allowed to have access to their records or certain aspect of their records. But if you don't, if you're not in a treatment relationship, then you obviously cannot have unlimited access to the person's records. So it is a violation of the minimum necessary rule for a healthcare provider to access someone else's health information. Now for you all, I'm learning from being at this conference today, a lot of you all are working like in a nursery or around newborn screening, but this is really important that somewhere like the health department where you may have somebody that's working in WIC and they want to find out something about somebody's records and STD. So that gets to be a real big thing for us, whereas it may not be as much of an issue for you all. But before I move on to the exceptions, the way that we found it, the reason that this is necessary to talk about in this setting is that when we're calling you all to ask about a specific patient or to ask for specific records, what ends up happening is we may have a specific question, but we get way more information than the information that we originally called and requested. And that in and of itself is a violation of the minimum necessary rule. Now, just as you have a rule, like the minimum necessary rule, you also have exceptions. So for disclosures or requests made by a healthcare provider, if another doctor's office asks you, say I need the entire medical record, you're not supposed to say, oh, well, I know they requested the whole record, but all I think they need is this, so I'll just hand them this amount. No, that is an exception. Healthcare providers, if they ask for the entire medical record, can have the whole thing. Also, for patients or their legal representatives, they can get a copy of their whole record, with the exception of psychotherapy notes, or in instances in which there's a healthcare professional that feels like someone's health and safety would be at issue if they provided them with the health record. That kind of brings, when I think about that, I think back to the, in the health department when we're treating people for STDs. Sometimes giving somebody else a copy of that record could really cause, a lot of problems. So also pursuant to authorization, so that's when the patient signs the form to say, hey, can you give this to my family member? Will you give this to my lawyer? We would give them the entire medical record if requested. Many of you all may know that the Department of Health and Human Services is the HIPAA police, the Office of Civil Rights. You always give them whatever they want. I wish I could give it to them in real time when they're actually doing an investigation, but they're an exception. Disclosure is required by law, so subpoenas, court orders, that type thing, for compliance with HIPAA standardized transactions. So this slide's just, HIPAA allows for you all to provide information to public health, for public health activities, and it also has the code here for the state of Alabama and the administrative code to just remind you all that you can give us information that we request. And before I actually move on to the next slide, I wanted to speak with you all about the disposal of information. We talked about the PHI that actually goes on the newborn screening card. It's important that, let's say you start this off and you've got the name, address, those type things, but you kind of mess up, so you decided you want to go do another card. It's really important that you remember that you have, you know, the trash can, the recycle bin, and the shred bin. That's what I always tell our employees. I don't really care what you put in the trash. You know, it could be a snack, your lunch, it doesn't matter. In terms of recycle paper, old magazines, or any documents that you're working on, as long as it's okay with your supervisor, they go in the recycle bin. But these are always going to be shredded, because whenever you have PHI, you need to make sure that if you're throwing it away, that it's actually destroyed. I would imagine that since so many of you work at hospitals, y'all probably have contracts with shredding companies and business associate agreements and all that other kind of stuff that I really like to talk about for a really long time that I'm not going to talk about now. But just make sure that you're putting these in the shred bin, because it seems like a simple thing to just go ahead and throw it away and get a new one. But just remember that this contains PHI. Another thing that I wanted to talk with you all about before moving to the next slide is social media. We just got through recording our HIPAA training for our agency, and I'm sure a lot of you all are aware that, especially with the younger generation, or what I call less seasoned individuals, they're obsessed with like taking pictures and social media and tagging each other and Instagram and Snapchat and all the other things that I don't even know about yet. But just make sure that you're behaving and that you're asking other employees to behave appropriately as it relates to social media. And I could imagine, especially with babies, you know, you have these really cute babies, you want to get in on a picture, or you want to congratulate a new mom because they were at your hospital, so and they went to high school with you, so you're like, oh, it was great to see you, you know, at Baptist today, and blah, 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 and you don't realize that you're actually breaching their confidentiality. Let them be the ones to place things on social media and not you. Now I want to talk with you all about completing these forms. It seems really, really simple to say, hey, you know, let's make sure that we make them legible, but you'd be surprised at the number that we receive that has so many strike-throughs that you can hardly understand what it says. And this is the thing that we're a bit suspicious about. For example, there's a possibility that if you're working in a nursery and maybe you have 4 or 5 babies there, it seems like a harmless thing to go ahead and fill several of them out, and you may have them all, you know, together, and when you get ready to walk to mom's room, you grab one of them. Well, when you get in the room, you realize, oh gosh, you know, I got the wrong card. So then you go to crossing those names out. So in all those fields, they have strikeouts, and you're trying to input other information, which makes it very confusing to read, especially because we don't have patient records with us. The only thing that we have is what you provide to us. So we do ask that you provide it to us in a legible way. And hopefully what we'd like for you to do too is just to fill out the card right before you go into the patient's rooms. I don't know how, speaking to this group, I don't know how popular that is, but it would be very good if you would do that, because that would eliminate those issues. Another thing is, please don't let the parent fill out the card. That seems like a very simple thing to ask, but don't do that. And one of the things that I was kind of joking on is like the legal liabilities of doing that. As healthcare professionals, like, we don't want to place our license in the hand of somebody who probably had a C-section like 2 or 3 days ago. So you want to make sure that just the healthcare provider is the one that's actually filling the card out. Also, I think that because this looks like a card as opposed to like a vial of blood, we don't always treat it that way. And one way to look at it is the labels that actually go on the blood vials. We wouldn't let a parent amend that or actually write that in. So we want to make sure that we're treating this just like we would any other type of specimen. And also remember that as providers, you're responsible for ensuring that we have satisfactory test results and for your follow-up in that process. So what do you do if there are major errors to a card and you already have the blood drops on this side? Well, I have what I think is probably a good answer to that, and that is to detach the blood specimen part and attach it to a new form with a notation that says exactly what it is that you're doing. And so I've learned that all of these have numbers, and what you want to do is make sure that the lab is able to match up the specimen with the card that actually has the demographic information on it. Does that make sense to everybody? Because when they get it at the lab, they have to know that this particular specimen goes with this baby. And if you don't do it in a clear enough way, it brings questions to the lab. And the lab is going to run the blood specimen just because it's important to do it in a timely way. But it's really important for you all to make sure that they are able to match up the blood specimen with the actual child. Also, I wanted to talk with you about multiple births. Please make sure that you adequately identify which specimen goes with which baby. Especially because also with multiple births, they can tend to have similar names, or it's very easy to mix them up because they're right there together. But you want to make sure that you're appropriately identifying them. And again, we won't have access to any of that, to the actual medical record, so it'll be very difficult for us if it's not given to us properly. Oh, I also have a notation to remember to do it right the first time and not the second or the third time, because it just wastes a whole bunch of valuable time. And as we've learned here today, time is of the essence. Finally, I wanted to talk with you about the newborn screening refusal form. It is some really super awesome lawyers probably got together and wrote this form, and I've read it. I think it's a great form. What it does, and I'm sure a lot of you may have seen it, it talks about when the parent signs off on it, they're saying that they understand the purpose and the need for newborn screening. They understand the risks and the benefit. They understand the consequences of late diagnosis. They understand that their medical provider, the Alabama Department of Public Health, and the American Academy of Pediatrics strongly recommend that they participate in newborn screening. And then finally it says that that if my child has one of the state's screen conditions, failure to participate in newborn screening may endanger the health or life of that child. And then it has where they check the box and they actually sign off on it with a witness. Well, this is extremely important if you have somebody that's refusing that test, that they actually sign this form. We've actually seen where they may have made a notation in the medical record where the parent refuses, but they don't actually get them to do this form. From a legal standpoint, it is much better for you to get them to do this form, because later on, if there are issues or anything happens, you don't want there to be a dispute. I mean, you go back to the medical record, and as a nurse, you just wrote that down and initial that they refuse, and that's all you have. You don't have anything from the parent that actually says that they refuse. So I wanted to encourage you all to utilize this form whenever that happens. So I'm available afterwards with any questions that you might have, and thank you for your time.